Thanks for joining us today, guys. Today we are joined by Carlos Hidalgo. He's got a great story to share in terms of his journey of starting his own company, working really hard at it, and kind of having an epiphany along the way that led him on a different path. So won't steal his thunder. We'll let him share. But Carlos, if you don't mind introducing yourself to our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. Carlos Hidalgo, as you said, I am a 25-year business veteran, about a 15, almost 16-year entrepreneur. Have started multiple companies. Some are no longer around to talk about. Learned a lot of lessons in those. And then most recently, I started an agent. Well, not most recently, but in 2005, co-founded an agency, grew that agency. And in 2016, made the decision to leave that agency, as I shared with you, to get my life back and to really kind of recalibrate and get back to who I believe I was created to be. So from there, I started a second company, a consultancy, and since then have started a coaching business. And I am involved in two other newly formed companies, as well as another that's in the healthcare software space that's pre-product.
You got your hands in a lot of different pots currently, huh?
I do. In addition to, we're renovating a house in the Adirondack Mountains. So my wife told me the other day, okay, we're done for a while. You're getting a little too far out over your skis. So you need to slow down. And she's absolutely right. So I've got my plate full.
Very cool. Well, I'm sure that will filter into part of our conversation as well. The thing we like to ask and would love to hear your perspective on is, obviously you've experienced great success in these companies that you've run, founded, been a part of. Once you got to that point where, profitability was coming in and you didn't have to worry about, what you're putting on the table or covering your roof over your head, and you had excess capital to kind of go and invest or put places. Where did you start putting that when you first kind of came into that, and kind of what was your strategic framework and what drove that?
Yeah, it took me a while to get there. Funny enough, when I had that drive, build, grow this thing mindset, which really took over, and that's what I wrote about in 2019 in the Un-American Dream. It wore me down. It burned me out in all kinds of ways, personally and professionally. It wasn't until I left that agency, because I hit rock bottom, I burned out, and I started to really form a different view of purpose over profit. And once I did that, it was amazing that each year my profits have grown. I've made more money. So just as an aside to your listeners, if you're grinding like crazy and you're going, man, how come I just can't get ahead? Maybe rethink what you're doing. In terms of investing, my wife and I really took a step back, met with our financial advisor. So now we each have a solo 401k, which dabbles in a lot of stocks and a mix of bonds. I've dabbled in crypto a little bit, not hugely significant, and then from time to time, we do a lot of different research. And most recently in April 2020, we did research and said, hey, the market is tanked right now for reasons that we all know about with the pandemic. What are some key investments we can make? And let's take a little bit of a gamble on some things. Fortunately, it paid off well for us, and we let it sit. For the first few weeks, I would check it multiple times a day to see what was going on, and then you just kind of forget about it. And then most recently, we've started to invest in real estate. One of the companies that I've started is a development company here in the Adirondack Mountains, and we're looking at commercial and residential real estate, commercial to rent commercial space on one floor, and residential space, apartments or Airbnb in the upper floor, and then residential places to refurbish, turn around, and flip. So it's something new for me that I've enjoyed. And then I'm also invested in some other companies, some startups that I want to be a part of, learning a lot in those as well. I love that. And so that's where we've put a good amount of our income over the last number of years. And it's been a heck of a ride and a lot of fun.
So that sounds like where you are currently and where you've gotten to today. You had mentioned this kind of decision to put purpose over profit, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you take us back to when money was kind of first coming in to your company, What was the decision making in terms of where it went then? Because I'm guessing it's drastically different from where you are today.
Yeah, it was drastically different. And what was different in that point is I had multiple partners. So I wasn't the sole decision maker. Most of it we put back into the company. We put back into our resources. We put back into our organization to grow from a people perspective, um, which was good and bad. I think we grew too fast. I think we grew in a way that wasn't sustainable. I think what we did, we overpaid for some talent in many ways, which hurt us because when you do that, there's also almost a sense of entitlement with some of the people that you bring on, and you're trying to, as a small business, trying to compete on a salary perspective and trying to justify it. So if I had to do it differently, I'm not saying I would invest in my people. I certainly would, but I'd put a whole lot more away for a rainy day, because when you're riding high, when you are bringing in the brand name clients and things just seem to be clicking, you kind of think you're unstoppable. And that's your little ego speaking, a very small word, but a huge impact. And I can tell you that there is always a rainy day around the corner, whether you see it coming or not. It's going to happen to every business. There's ebbs and flows. And so I think we would have just appropriated it a little bit differently, still invested in people, but also more so invested in people who are aligned to our culture first, because I can teach you anything I need you to do.
Fascinating. We're going through a similar, lots of similar conversations to what you articulated, right? In terms of potentially overpaying for some people, having to right size that, having to get back to, our cultural roots first, while still making sure that the talent is there, right? And it can be difficult at times when you're an entrepreneur to be patient to find the right people, but man, it's such a cost to the business when you don't have that right person that you hire, and you've got to figure it out along the way.
Oh, it is an immense cost to the business. And we were actually just talking about this today. My wife and I, she worked for a number of years when we lived in Colorado in education in the school that she was a part of. Her principal of that school was probably one of the best hirers I ever met. And Pat was absolutely adamant that we hire for culture first, because it only takes one person to disrupt your culture. And then what happens is that seeps out to your customers. And I coach a guy here in town where he had an individual that it was just a cultural misalignment. And his customers started to mention, hey, what's with this guy? And I said to him, I said, as hard as this is going to be, probably the best thing you can do is to let him go now, because it's killing your reputation. It's killing your customers to the point where they're bringing it to your attention, and you're going home frustrated every night, ready to pull your hair out. The guy's not going to turn the corner. And it doesn't mean he's wrong and you're right. It just means there's a misalignment. So get the divorce, make it happen, and move on. And you can do it in a way that's loving, that's empathetic, all those things. But yeah, culture is key. It's foundational to the success of your business.
So you had talked about one of the changes you would make is essentially having more for a rainy day. It sounds like that was mostly on the business front. Were
Yeah.
there any personal investments that you were making at the time that you would do differently as well?
Yeah, I was caught up in the consumerism of, I had to stay in the nicest places, had to wear the nice suit and the this and that. And that's fine if that's what you want to do, but it wasn't me. That's not me. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you in a hoodie and a t-shirt. I'm almost dressed up for you, Liam, just so you know. So I just spent on stuff. And if I had to do it again, I would spend on experience. And that's what we try to do now with the discretionary income that my wife and I have. We want to spend on experience, and we want to experience it together. We want to experience with our 4 adult children. We now are fortunate enough to have an amazing daughter-in-law who's part of our family. And so we always try to do that. And then the other thing that we try to do is give away at least 10% of our profit, not our revenue, our profit every year to organizations that, and we've taken a real hard look at what we did. And we realized a number of years ago, we were giving a little bit to all these different places. So we made the call and talked to some organizations that we really love, but said, hey, we're going to stop because we wanted to maximize what we were able to do. And so right now we have 2 organizations that we support. And then at the end of every year, around December 15th, we calculate our profit. And then greatest joy of being in business, we write a check and give it off to that. I'm going to say not give it, we invest in that nonprofit.
Are you involved from a time or board perspective with those nonprofits as well, or is it purely financial?
One of them is a time perspective. We do some pro bono consulting for one of them. The other one is just purely monetary. And then we also we support, I actually said 2, I lied, there's 3. We support one, both time and financial in Uganda. And my wife has really been the driver behind that, having visited there 9 times and really involved with that organization.
That's awesome. We have something similar built into our charter as well, at 10% of profits that you just plan for it and the business finds a way. And when you're doing well, it's easy and it's a lot of joy, which is great.
Certainly. And I get to tell my clients that they're a part of that, right? They're the reason we're a purpose-driven business. So how awesome that they get to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's neat. So you had mentioned at some point there was this inflection that happened, right? You talked about getting burnt out at the agency, stepping away. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of, what was in your mindset, where you came from, where you're at today, and kind of how did that shift? You talked about moving to experience versus consumerism. Did that shift happen at the same time? Was this all a package deal, or was it kind of bits and pieces along the way?
It was a package deal with bits and pieces along the way. Interestingly enough, in 2005, when I left the software company, I was with BMC Software. I did it for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, because my children were young at that point, and I was traveling an inordinate amount of miles every year, and I was just missing out. So I wanted to be home. So I started as a lifestyle, co-founded this agency as a lifestyle business. And then a number of years later, we started to get bigger name clients, and we were kind of looking at each other like, this is crazy. And then we started to have people say, hey, are you hiring? And we were like, what? And then we had an overture to be purchased. I'm like, what are you going to purchase? Like a couple of laptops and like 3 or 4 people who know B2B marketing. And then what really happened is in 2011, 2012, we started really take off. And I just couldn't get enough of it. And so we started hiring like crazy. At that point, we were getting really big name clients. I was being flown all over the world to speak. Then in 2015, I came out with my first book around demand generation. It hit as an Amazon #1 bestseller, or Amazon #1 new release. Sorry, don't want to oversell myself. And my ego took over, and I just turned into followed everything false that I thought made you successful. And when I was home, I really wasn't home because my mind was elsewhere. I put my business ahead of everything. I put myself ahead of everything. Made some really bad personal choices, and I just started to become an egomaniac, and just thought this was success. And when you ride that wave and you think that you're kind of it, and then when it all falls apart and your wife and your kids say, yeah, we're not even sure who you are anymore. And we're not even sure, my wife, I'm not even sure I want to stay married to you. It's a huge wake-up call. So I went from living in Colorado Springs, being what I thought was a hotshot CEO, really nice house in a beautiful neighborhood, to being separated for 9 months and having 2 roommates who I hardly knew, paying $500 a month for a bedroom. And it was kind of like God put his knee in the back of my neck and was like, how long are we going to do this dance until you finally just say, okay, let me get back to who I'm created to be. So I had to make a decision. What life did I really want? Did I want the one that I was living, which is a fallacy, or did I want the one that was more in line with the truest form of myself? And thankfully I chose the latter. And so started to really do a lot of hard work and introspection, therapy, making a lot of amends to a lot of people that I had just kind of trampled over. And I can say thankfully that I'm here standing. I'm living my best life ever. My wife and I talk about we are in our second marriage to the same but two very different people. She has a very poignant chapter in the book, because I think in any unhinged business pursuit, there's always collateral or people that are damaged in the process. And I wanted her story to be told. And I have one business partner and I'm married to her. And so it's a great way to live life. But it was a huge wake up call, and it was a rebuilding process starting from really what I say is rock bottom.
How did, well, obviously you hit rock bottom. What are some of the things that, as other entrepreneurs are going through this, right, and starting to experience success and growth, right, which everyone that we're talking to obviously has experienced growth, right? People who are listening either are in that or aspire to be at that, right? And so, what are some of the signs that you're losing control and kind of headed down this path that is, this egomaniac component?
Yeah, I think number one is you start believing your own press, and you kind of sit back and whether you say it out loud or think it, but you're like, yeah, kind of look what I'm doing. I'm kind of bad. I'm kind of badass, right? Now we all want confidence. We all want to be confident, but I think if you're at that level of success, you didn't do it on your own. There was a lot of people who helped you, and probably people who helped you that you're not even aware of. I would ask the closest of relationships to you. Am I different? Do I seem different? Am I still the person that, if you're married, that you fell in love with? Ask your kids, hey, how much time am I given as your dad or as your mom? Do you feel like I'm available and present to you? Now, if you're going to ask those questions, be prepared for the answers. Now, I was told repeatedly, to tell you how bad it got, and I'm embarrassed to say this, repeatedly, like, we need you at home. And my response was, yeah, but there's 35 people in Atlanta who need me. Now, my wife at that point pointed out very astutely, and I wasn't ready to hear it, and it actually kind of pissed me off, was if you have to be there that often to manage your team, then you hired a bunch of really inept people, which makes you a bad CEO. And she was right. And so I really think to just kind of check yourself and then be accountable to a group of people. When I say a group, I'm not talking like 10. Pick 2 to 3 who are just going to be brutally honest with you and say, hey, you know what, you're going down this path, or we see this, and be receptive to that. Because I can tell you, having walked through what I called my dark night of the soul, it was the hardest, most gut-wrenching thing I've ever done in my life. Now, I'm glad I did it, but be very aware. And if you think, well, I can just handle this on my own, you're wrong. We were not meant to live in isolation. We were meant to live in community. And if you can get 2 to 3 people, one should be your spouse if you're married, who can just kind of speak truth into your life and tell you what they're seeing, be open to it. They're not trying to be rude. They're not trying to be mean. They're actually being really good friends.
Good feedback. And it takes a different level of relationship to get to that point, I think, where it's deep, it's meaningful. There's no preconceived notions on what the feedback is, right? To be able to be open to it is challenging, for sure. It takes a lot of growth to get to that point.
Yeah, but I think it's needed. I think we all need people who can point out our blind spots, and God help us if we can't allow our spouse to do that. I mean, just the other day when my wife said, I love you. I love the way your brain works. I love how many ideas you have, but we need to hit pause. You're taking on too much. She's exactly right. And I would have kept going until the point where it was like, oh, wow, I do have a lot. So the fact that she loves me enough to point these things out to me And then I have two very, very close friends who, and again, notice I didn't say I want them to hold me accountable. I want to be accountable to them. And so I check in with them regularly. We talk a lot about what's going on, good, bad, ugly, and different. And I know from them and they know from me, there's going to be no judgment or reprise because we're all human. We're all flawed. And that's the beauty of relationship.
Yeah. So as you kind of flipping back to as you started to experience this growth, right? Profit started to increase when you put purpose before profit. More and more dollars to invest, right? More and more to be able to invest the charities that you support. Was there a strategic framework that you went through in terms of where to start in putting the money as you started to grow that pool, right? So you talked about the financial advisor, you talked about kind of different market timing events and asset classes. Kind of where did you start to get to where you are today that was beyond just putting money into the business or saving for a rainy day?
Right. I started with the end in mind. What did I want? And so I picked the age of 57. And I told my financial advisor, who I've known, he's known me since I was 12. And I said, Dave, I don't think I'll ever retire because I'll drive Suzanne crazy if I do. I don't think I could ever be that guy who fishes 3 days a week and plays golf or does whatever. I love the work I do. So I'll always be doing something, maybe, not, I just recently moved to 4-day weeks. So maybe not 4 days a week, maybe 2.5. But I said, at 57, I want the option to do whatever I want. If I want to take a year off and train for an Ironman, I want to take a year off and train for an Ironman. And so I started with the end goal in mind. And then we backed up and said, now what do we need to do in order to secure that goal, right? And I told him, I said, it's not even a goal. I called it an option because I don't want to get so focused that if 57 comes and goes, somehow I failed. And so then we started talking about diversification, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate, crypto, investing in new businesses that, startups that I'm involved with that may or may not ever see the light of day, but hold a lot of promise. And then I also started to invest in myself from a creativity perspective. So I spent the last 2 years writing a screenplay. Had never done it before. I have a son who is in film. So he and I talked about it. And I said, okay, if this thing, I'm going to put 2 years into it as a part-time kind of, I hate the term, but side hustle, side gig. And because I own my own company, I would actually use some working hours to write it. If this thing hits and somebody buys it and they like it, how does that work contractually? So I'm picking the brain of my son. And I realized this thing could actually be, if it took off, could be pretty lucrative. Now I know the chances are slim, but that was another area that I was willing to give my time in order to see if there's a potential big ROI. So when I talked about the diversification, I really diversified. And so, but it all started with, what do I want to do? What option do I want when I'm 57? So I just turned 50 in July. I got 7 years. And so, and we continue to, invest in all these different things in all these different areas that I talked about. And then one of the other things we do is whatever my wife makes, we don't touch. It just sits. We could, and that's what we call our rainy day fund. And it's allowed us to do a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise without touching what we're putting away for, each year from the company and then also from our own paychecks.
So you talked about this target at 57. How do you ensure that target doesn't shift in terms of either, the quality of life that you want, increase in more stuff or more time or more experience or whatever that is, right? Or inflation, right? So how do you make sure it's not a never ending game of chasing a number that's, continually getting bigger as hopes and wants and dreams and markets, change accordingly?
Yeah, one of the things my wife and I do, and we call it our life design plan, and it's a lot of what we coach on, is we talk about anything and everything under the sun. What do we want? So we bought this house here in the Adirondacks. We love it. It's, we're putting a lot of money into it to make it our own and remodel it. But we're already talking about, what, in 5 years, how awesome would it be to have a house on the lake? Keep this one, rent it out, but have a place on the lake. Will that happen? I don't know. I hope it does. I think it will. But I think that the challenge is holding things loosely. I'm not so caught up in, and that's why I use the subtle term of an option than a goal. Because for me, I tell people I'm a recovering control freak. And I don't want to get so caught up on an expectation that if it doesn't come true, I feel like a failure. And so obviously inflation, I can't control. That's beyond my control. So I can sit here and worry about it. Now I can plan for it. And so I'll do that. And then the other thing is I'm not waiting to retire. I'm not waiting to 57 to live the life that I want to live. We're doing that now, which was one of the reasons we moved up here. Prior to this, people say, so where did you live before this? I said, in my RV for 7 months, full time, because my wife and I wanted to see what that was like and kind of travel around parts of the country. We expected it to last longer, but before we did that, we said if a house became available in this town with this criteria, we would buy it. And lo and behold, it happened. So we bought it. So holding things loosely, not getting so caught up on your expectation, and then having a life design plan that categorizes and says, this is the life we want to live, and then go start to live it. My wife and I travel a lot, even with COVID. We just looked at our calendar. We're traveling at the end of October, we're going to Oregon. So we'll be in close to your neck of the woods for 10 days. November, we're staying home. December, we're going to be in Austin. January, we're going to be down in Florida. In February, we're going to go down to the Caribbean. So we're planning all these trips. And I'm like, why? And it's one of the reasons I went to 4-day work weeks. Why should I wait to retire? Because some days not a day in the week. And unfortunately, I've known at least 3 men who under 50 drop dead of heart attacks. I don't want to be in that category. I want to be able to say I lived life to the fullest as long as I have it.
Did you travel a lot with kids as well?
We did our fair amount. We did a lot of road trips. When I was traveling all over the world, we flew because I could cash in all my points, because buying 6 plane tickets. But when we were all together this June, all my kids and my daughter-in-law and my son's long-term girlfriend came up, and I asked them all, I said, all these road trips we did, we didn't go to Disneyland or Disney World. We went to Yosemite. We would come up here from Texas when we lived in Texas. We'd spend 6 weeks up here in the Adirondacks. We'd go to Colorado. We've been to Florida. I mean, we've been all over the place. I said, you guys feel like you missed out on anything? And they were like, we loved the road trips. There was one we drove from Dallas to LA to visit my wife's parents. It was a long trip. It was a long road trip, but those road trips for us were great. And then we would fly too when we could make it work. And so our last trip we all did together was in 2019. It was just the 6 of us. We all went down to the Dominican. Now it's a little bit easier to travel with adult children, but I also think with younger children, it's a great way to show them and again, spend on experience. And it doesn't have to be, you can piece together flights, you can do road trips. I'm telling you, your kids will love it. Your kids will love it.
That's it's cool to hear. It's flying. Ours are 1.5 and just shy of 3.
Yep.
So there's a lot of challenge involved with doing it, but a lot of fun in process. And once you get there, and I think it's just getting over some of those initial hurdles.
Yeah, and what it's done to me now and my wife is anytime we see a young family, we always ask, hey, do you need help? Because we've been there, right? And at the end of the day, if your 1.5-year-old, blows a gasket on a flight, it happens. What that 1.5-old is doing is just acting out and articulating what all of us feel anyway, being on an airplane. They're just able to get away with it.
Yes, they do, right? So As we wrap up here, Carlos, if there was one thing that you'd want to share with the audience, one piece of advice, what would that be to kind of people who are going through this growth trajectory?
Yeah, I would say keep your work, keep your company in its rightful place. Work is noble, it's valuable. I'm a son of an immigrant. I'm a big believer in a good work ethic, but it's not your life. It's part of your life. And if you can keep it in its rightful place and really get back to who you were created to be and live out your purpose through your work, you're going to have one hell of a time.
That's great. If our listeners want to connect back with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can email me, just Carlos at carlosandsuzanne.com, and that's SUSANNE.com. You can visit our website, carlosandsuzanne.com. You can listen to our podcast, the Life Design Podcast. Or hit me up on LinkedIn. I always respond to everybody on LinkedIn as well, just Carlos Hidalgo, Hidalgo.
Very cool. I appreciate you being on the show today, Carlos, and sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Liam.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.